Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Beacon in the Storm. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today, I have a very special guest with us. She is an author of a new book called Men Too. She is the recipient of the Order of Australia, and she's a men's rights activist. So please help me in welcoming Bettina Arndt. Hi there,
Hi,
Bettina. How's it
nice.
going?
They're very good. Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Oh,
And
that's it. My book is called #Men Too.
hashtag
That's
Men Too.
that's supposed to be the joke, of course.
I did not miss that joke when I saw it. um,
Yeah.
Speaking of, you sent me the introduction to that, and like that is absolutely fascinating. That you go to a cricket and there's everybody in pink, and they don't quite understand that there's a whole other side to the gender discussion. They just understand that they're supposed to be talking about women's issues and
Raising money for breast cancer.
breast
That's
cancer
about.
specifically. Yes.
So we had this famous cricket match called a test. It's a long 5-day match. Hard to imagine for Americans why anyone would want to play a game for 5 days. But that's what it is. And they have one day each year in Australia of that test devoted to raising money for breast cancer, because one of the famous cricketers' wives died of breast cancer. I mean, they've been doing this for years and years and years. And I go along there and see all these men dressed in pink, and it just drove me crazy, because breast cancer gets far too much of the cancer dollar in Australia and in most other countries. Women are really good at raising money and for this, I mean, what is obviously an important cause, but it's not more important in my mind than all the other cancers, and particularly ones affecting men like prostate cancer, brain cancer, and so on. And they scrambling trying to do any funding. And here were these men pouring money towards breast cancer, getting more breast cancer nurses, when lots of people, if you're a man with prostate cancer, you tend to get very poor advice and support in the recovery period. And my particular interest was in the sexual functioning after prostate cancer, and the fact that generally this has been an area which has been so poorly handled, and men haven't had nearly enough education in recovering from that.
Let alone learning about it. I'm 36 years old, and I don't think I've ever had a doctor even mention it. Like it's something that I'm supposed to worry about when I'm older. They don't say how much older, but sometime down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I used to give lectures to urologists, and these people, usually men, they were so embarrassed to have me there talking about erections, and talking about the fact. I mean, just the fact that we have these doctors who do surgery on the penis. The penis has various functions, and urinary functions, but also, I mean, I would argue what its major function in a sense is erections. And they do the surgery, and it's like doing a knee surgery, not caring whether the person walks again. I mean, to not worry about whether a man will get an erection is a real failure for that doctor. Right. And yet, for years and years and years, they were taught very little about how to help men regain their erectile functioning. And a lot of them still do a really lousy job.
Right. So on the topic of erectile functioning, how about we begin by having you give us a little bit of your background, since we kind of just jumped into it.
Why is she talking about all this? I have a funny background, because I was originally one of Australia's first sex therapists. I started my career as training to be a clinical psychologist, and worked as a therapist for a tiny period, specializing in sex, and had a wonderful early career, working for a sex education magazine, going on television and radio and talking about sex for 10 years. What more could a girl want?
Right.
And it was really fascinating, because it was a time in Australia where sex had been very much a taboo topic, and I was out there saying, this is part of life, let's just talk about this, doing talkback radio, so on. It was great fun. And a lot of what my work then was inspired by trying to help women. I regarded myself as a feminist, and I wanted to improve this part of women's lives. But gradually I saw the light. After about 10 years of doing this, I started to realize there was, what it was like to be on the other side of the fence. Men started to talk to me, not just about sex, but about all the other things that were concerning them in their lives. And I realized that more and more our cultural dialogue was absolutely dominated by women's needs and women's wants, and how men felt about things simply didn't get a look in.
So on that note, every day I post content and I have somebody telling me that men are making this up, that they don't actually have issues. You're saying men actually do have issues.
Oh, there's a good reason. In Australia, it's like 6 out of the 8 people who kill themselves every day in Australia are male, and men don't have issues. We have a national suicide prevention body, which studiously ignores the fact that this is a male problem. Most of the funding that goes towards suicide prevention is directed to women and women's groups. And what research there is done on men is all about, it's all about toxic masculinity and the fact that men don't cry enough and won't reach out for help. And they never dare address the question of why are men killing themselves. And there's a very good reason for that, because an awful lot of the suicides here, and I think in most other countries, are to do with relationship breakdown and the consequences for men of losing particularly when they have children, of losing their families are just immense. And our incredibly biased family law system is driving men to suicide.
Absolutely. In your book, you discuss the ability of a woman to make an accusation of violence. And in fact, before we started, I told you I was an attorney, and my wife and I did domestic cases, and it was understood but never explicitly stated that the man was going to get short shrift. We just kind of understood that all the woman has to do is make an accusation, and then he's not allowed to see his kids again. Yeah, he's going to have a caseworker, he's going to have some visitation, but by that point, she's now the domestic or the custodian of the child, and she's going to get the kid. And so you're saying that's a problem.
A massive problem. I mean, I had a very interesting role over the next part of my career was very much writing for newspapers, be a social commentator. Mm-hmm. And I got involved in the family law area and ended up being put on various government committees. We had a conservative government under a man called John Howard many years ago. And he was interestingly the only prime minister we've ever had who was very interested in men and was very interested in the role of fathers in children's lives. And he went out and got committees together to work out ways of trying to ensure children had a right to see both parents after divorce. And he enshrined this in our law. And there was a period there where Australia was leading the world in a push not towards shared custody in the traditional sense of equal time, but certainly a presumption that this is where you start, with this assumption that fathers and mothers are going to be involved in the care of children after divorce. And you move away from that depending on the circumstances. But that was the starting point. We now have a Labor government, new government in Australia, and one of their first pieces of legislation they're trying to push through winds back those important reforms enshrining the right of children to have contact with both parents. And it's just outrageous. After all these years of Australia showing the way to the rest of the world, we're going to go back to mother custody. Mum wins all. And as you say, the big issue in all of that is this feminist argument that we have to protect children from violent fathers. And that, that there's this enormous problem of domestic violence in this country. It's simply not true. If you look at our official statistics, less than 1% of women report physical violence from their partner. Okay. Their current partner or their past relationships, less than 1% are physically violent. And what the domestic violence industry has done is included all sorts of other abuse in there. And it's enough to make an accusation that, you fear violence could occur. Mm-hmm. And that could give you a violence or a protected apprehended violence order. So you don't have to have any violence. You just have to have a fear of violence. You could have emotional abuse. You could have financial abuse. The list has grown and grown over the years. And it is this veritable industry now where every lawyer, every woman knows if she makes an accusation, the whole of the justice system swings in her favour. And not only do men not get to see their children, if they're allowed to see their children at all, they have to pay for supervised contact, significant amounts of money, with someone watching them interact with their kids, simply because she's made an accusation that violence could occur. I mean, the whole system has absolutely floundered now because of the very effective use of the violence card by feminists in our family law system.
Okay, so Bettina, I'm going to be slightly contrarian for a second.
Yeah.
Men commit most crimes, don't they? Men are the ones who are normally violent in the domestic setting, aren't they?
Men, no, that's actually not true.
Okay.
We have over 40 years of research on domestic violence, which now shows that women are more likely than men to instigate physical violence.
Really?
1,700 peer-reviewed papers that show precisely that. That
Wow.
Women are more to start the violence, but of course men are stronger and bigger, and they're more, if violence occurs, they're the ones who are more likely to get injured. So of course we have to I'm not saying we mustn't take domestic violence seriously. That was a really important issue to address in our society. There are some very dangerous men, and particularly powerful big men can damage their partners, of course, very easily. But also women, women are more likely to throw things. They're more likely to use objects to hurt men. We have a society where a woman slapping a man is treated as a great joke. On television series after television series, you see, she's hit him over the head because she's angry with him, and that's regarded as something we laugh about. I mean, the facts are very different. The facts are that there are just as many children cowering from their mothers as there are cowering from their fathers in family violence. Women are more likely to be violent to their children than men are. And yet in Australia, we have a deliberate suppression of that data. They simply won't publish the gender breakdown of abuse of children because it shows that women are more violent.
So the research shows that women are the ones who are more likely to cause harm to their own children than
absolutely.
Men.
Emotional abuse, physical abuse, and of course the women feminists would argue that's because women spend more time with their children. But is that a reason to ignore that problem? The fact that women can be putting their children at risk, It's part of this story, and it's a part that never gets addressed.
Okay. Another aspect of the violence question that you've addressed is violence on campuses. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I spent a few very hair-raising years speaking out about what I call our kangaroo. Sorry, I'm very croaky today.
That's okay.
Speaking out about our kangaroo courts. So we actually followed the American example, which was set up under Joe Biden. Joe Biden decided he wanted to change the culture of America. And he says that the reason he chose the campuses was this is a very good place to start influencing, a change in the culture. Mm-hmm. And what he wanted to do was punish sexual misconduct on campus, which essentially meant setting up courts which don't give a fair hearing to men, which are absolutely tilted so that all the normal legal protections are denied the accused man. And the chances are that he will get thrown out of college or, his education totally derailed as a result of an accusation of sexual misconduct by a woman. And in America, they started that many years before us, a good decade before Australia, but we actually then set up courts in our universities across the country. And I did a campus tour, which was pretty funny because I had to call in the riot squad to protect me, but from these violent feminist activists who didn't want me talking about this, didn't want me talking about what was happening to young men on our campuses. I have had men from all over Australia writing to me who've been falsely accused on campus, and we've got lawyers defending them and helping them handle these committees that are there, secretive committees that are making decisions about, throwing them out of university. So that's just one area I've been very involved in. And sadly, we've made very little progress. I've helped some individual students, but it's all firmly in place that this is going on, and no one cares. No one cares about what's happening to men.
Why is that? Just from your perspective, you said you've been doing this for 30 some years, if not longer. Why? Why does nobody seem to care?
Because feminists are very powerful. I did a recent analysis of our public service, our government bureaucracy. Most government departments now have 60-70% women. And these are the people making all our public policy decisions. And a lot of the key ones are feminists determined to constantly put advantage women at the expense of men. It's, they've marched through all our institutions, all the legal profession, the psychology profession, you name it. They're all marching to the feminist tune now. And men, the powerful men who still, of course, run much of the top echelons of our society have been absolutely cowed into doing the right thing, into trying to give the feminists what they want because they don't want to be targeted. We know how easy it is for a powerful man to be brought to his knees through any sort of accusation, whether it's an accusation of bullying or harassment or whatever it is. All powerful men are vulnerable. All powerful men at some stage have annoyed a woman in their life, whether it was a woman who they didn't think was very good and they didn't promote her or they told her off or whatever it is. And women, the Me Too movement has absolutely given women the power to destroy any man they like. And we see it again and again.
So I make broad statements like that on my content as well. Do you have any specific examples of a powerful man being brought to his knees? Are you just saying something?
Absolutely. I mean, we had a famous case in Australia last year where our Attorney General, the leading lawmaker for the country, faced an accusation from a woman who was quite disturbed, who had actually ended up committing suicide. Oh. And this case was dredged up. She had decided she didn't want to go. She was, details were revealed of her diaries and so on, showing this was not a woman who, was in control of her mental state. And her family didn't want this brought forward, but the feminists used this argument to force that man to resign, to dredge up this old case, to accuse him of being a rapist. And nothing could ever happen to that case because the woman was dead. Unfortunately, she'd committed suicide. But it was enough to bring him down. We've had a whole string of politicians being dealt with in the same way. And Australia's had this extraordinary case for the last year involving a woman who was called Brittany Higgins, who is a staffer. She worked for a government minister. So she worked in Parliament. She went out with a group of other people that she worked with and got very drunk, came back with another guy who she worked with into Parliament in the middle of the night and fell asleep on the minister's couch and was found by a security officer half naked, dressed, bunched up around her, no knickers, nothing, drunk on the minister's couch. The next day, the guy involved was fired. He has always categorically said he went in to pick up his keys to do some stuff in Parliament. He never went near her. She fell asleep in this other office. He was fired for having gone in the middle of the night. And she saw him being fired and blurted out that he'd raped her. And this case was one of the major reasons the last government lost power, because the opposition used this rape case. And we now have evidence from a conversation that was recorded between this girl, Brittany Higgins, and members and key media people plotting to bring down the government using this rape accusation. And that's all been made public. I mean, it's supposed to be the most monumental scandal. And Brittany Higgins was regarded as an absolute hero by the feminists. There were women's marches. There were, she was feted on our television. She was, people won awards for interviewing her. This is even before the criminal case was heard. And then we had this long criminal case, which ended up falling apart for various reasons. And then she was given, it would seem like nearly $3 million compensation by the government. And now that's all being investigated. But so this case has just mesmerized the nation. But from the day it started, people started writing to me and saying, they just didn't believe it for 1 minute that this was a rape victim. It was just too convenient that she saved her job by blurting out the fact that she'd been raped. And in this criminal case, her story absolutely fell apart. And yet half the country believes she is a hero. It's been quite extraordinary, this whole thing.
Okay, so Bettina, you've made me slightly depressed about my prospects of being able to change the world and get people to realize that men have issues. If it sounds like the entire system is geared against me, so how about let's look at the individual man, because I may not be able to change a system, but maybe I can change a life. What kinds of issues are going on in an individual man's life that may not maybe be swept under the rug or may be ignored that should be addressed?
It's hard to know where to start. I mean, I worry, I think we should start with boys.
Okay.
I mean, I've written a lot, for instance, about boys' education and why it is that boys are starting to do so badly vis-a-vis girls. Of course, boys used to do better than girls in our school systems. And we rightly started introducing lots of new approaches and programs and so on to encourage girls to achieve their potential, which was a fantastic thing. Girls should get involved in science. Girls should, there's nothing wrong with girls achieving, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. About 20 years ago, the results were really coming in where I live, and I was interviewing an education bureaucrat, and I said, look at this growing gap between girls and boys. Girls are doing so well. Parents are writing to me saying, when we have a speech night or awards night in our school, it's all girls now, whereas it used to be. And I said to her, what will you do if the gap continues to grow between boys and girls? And she said, we'll analyze, we'll wait 2,000 years and analyze the results very, very carefully. I said, no, it's only a joke.
Okay.
It's actually, it's 20 years later, boys in Australia are now the most disadvantaged group of all the various groups being studied. And no one gives a stuff. No one does anything about it. And that's where it starts. Boys in schools knowing perfectly well that the girls are the ones who get all the attention from the teachers. The whole system of education is now being structured to advantage girls. And boys are floundering. I know that in America there's been some recent books absolutely pointing out how difficult life is for boys. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely worrying. We've got people like Jordan Peterson speaking out about what we're doing in the way we're raising sons and how we're not encouraging boys to know their strengths and to gain the confidence they need to deal with this rather hostile world. And of course, I was lucky enough to be a MC for the first time Jordan Peterson came to Australia, looking out of this sea of young men who were just rapt in hearing someone say, I get you, I understand what you're going through. We have to do more to help young men. I mean, it was terribly inspiring to see someone who is capturing the mood that's out there and capturing the sense in young men that we have to think more about what's happening to their lives.
Bettina, this has been absolutely fascinating. I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. I don't want to take too much of your time. I told you this would be about half hour. So do you have any other final thoughts you want to share with us before we wrap up?
One thought I had, I was very worried a while ago to see, that there's been a real shift in the traditional preference. People always used to joke about how everybody wanted to have a boy when they have a baby. That was, men wanted to have a son, and mums,
They want daughters, yeah.
I did. The boys, it's great to have a boy, and now that's totally shifted. Both boys and girls prefer to have, both men and women prefer to have a girl.
Really?
And that's a really worrying thing. I mean, I think boys are wonderful. I think men, I've always loved men, and I spent all my life now really predominantly working to support men and encourage men and make them feel good about themselves. And that's tragic to me, that there's been such a shift in our society from valuing and perhaps giving too much power to men, having them up on a pedestal, but to have it totally reversed to a situation where we don't value masculinity anymore is something that really worries me. And I hope I'm doing my best to try to reverse that and to celebrate men and masculinity.
So on that, I'll have one final question for you. So I had a guest on not too long ago who said that there was some group that was asked, about masculinity, if they could name a single positive aspect of masculinity, because you're always hearing about toxic masculinity. Can you give an example of positive masculinity, please?
I've got a grandson, a baby grandson, and I was watching his mum and dad, playing with this little boy. And he's only 3 months old. But watching the dad, of course, throw the baby in the air, which is classic, the sort of roughhousing play that males have always used with their sons.
I did it to my daughter too. So.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's important for both sexes, but I think there's something particular about male, and this is something Jordan Peterson talks about, how men can teach boys to risk take and to know their strengths in a way that's extremely important for them to do well in the world. But it was just such a joyous thing, and it's something that mum would be hesitant about, teaching the boy to take that sort of risks and to know his strengths and to enjoy his physicality. And that's what we need to celebrate, that particular bond between fathers and sons, and the fact that that is an important part of teaching men to be men.
Wonderful. All right. Now, as we wrap up, how could somebody get in touch with you if they wanted to? You have a hashtag #Men2 book coming out, but beyond that, if they wanted to reach out, how could they do that?
That was a while ago. I know just my name, Bettina Arndt, which is a bit confusing, ARNDT. But you'll find that I've got a website, I've got a Substack, very healthy Substack blog, where I write a lot of my recent thoughts on this subject. Don't look at Wikipedia because it's been captured by the feminists who do their best to put a whole lot of crap out there about me. I mean, I have a lot of enemies because it's very unpopular to fight for men.
Okay. Bettina Arndt, thank you so much for coming on with us today. We genuinely appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you, Bradford. Okay.
And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, keep looking for the light in the tempest. God will show you the way.